Hey, this is Scarf Banzai. Today we're taking a look at the Sony A6600 thanks to Cameracraft in Rockford, Illinois for letting me try this out at their shop. The A6600 is a replacement for the A6500 that came out quite a while back. They both have the in-body stabilization, that SteadyShot in them. They are APS-C cameras. Let's go over some of the handling and physical features of the A6600. I did try this camera out with their new f2.8 zoom lens. The grip on the A6600 is very different than previous APS-C cameras. It is a lot wider. Now it's about the same height probably than a lot of similar cameras in this lineup, but it is wider because it has a much larger battery. It has that APS-Z100 battery, which is very interesting on this camera, and it's a good improvement on APS-C cameras in general. The memory card slot is right by the battery, but in this case it's easy to access. It's on the side of the battery instead of the flap hinge area, so it's a lot easier to access. If it's going to be down there, definitely a good spot for it. The tripod socket on the A6600 is in a nice position. You shouldn't have any issues with quick release plates, so the battery and memory card should be easy to take out with a tripod connected. Sony tends to use the same design for all of their current cameras of a given lineup, so with all the APS-C cameras you have that flip up screen. Pretty nice. You get a full vlogging selfie ability with it, and it flips down a decent amount as well. Now you can't do any portrait stuff with that screen to get a better view. All the ports are on the side of the camera, they're easy to access, and you have a door covering them. You have the mic port, a headphone jack, which is very nice, and also a micro HDMI and the USB port. You can charge the camera with the micro USB port. When you're using the screen, you flip it forward towards the lens. If you want to use a microphone, you potentially want to put it on the hot shoe connection. In this case, it's not going to work well, so you're going to want to use some type of bracket system with the A6600. It's the same case with all of their recent cameras, the 6100 and the 6400. So there probably are brackets available already. If not, definitely there will be ones coming out for the 6600. The Viewfinder felt pretty average. I think it is better than some of the other cameras that I've used, but there are definitely some APS-C cameras that have, in my opinion, a nicer viewfinder. Right on the side of the viewfinder, it has that diopter adjustment, easy to access. Also, I did a quick test with the viewfinder and the automatic switcher between the viewfinder and the screen. The back screen on the A6600 is a touchscreen as usual. Same situation with this camera as their other ones. You can touch to focus, but you can't do anything else with that touchscreen. Now in this case, it felt much more responsive than other cameras for some reason that I've used of the Sonys, making it a little quicker to touch to focus with this camera. Also could have been the lens that I was using. The camera does have that hot shoe port, which is good for flash. Some of their accessories work with it as well. Now in this setup, there is no built-in flash. I think at this level of camera, it's not a big issue. Should be just fine. You can use an external flash. Let's go over some of the buttons and control on the A6600. Once you understand Sony's control scheme on their cameras, it's pretty easy to use. One of the key buttons to use is the FN button that allows you quick access to a lot of features. You can adjust that as you like. Basically, a lot of things that you need to change relatively often, they'll probably be in there, so you don't have to go into their big menu system. There is a dedicated video record button, however it's difficult to access and it feels a little recessed, which was probably intentional, so you won't be pressing it accidentally, but it is still hard to press in general. In addition to this camera, there is a switch with autofocus, manual focus, and AEL features, plus a button inside, so that's good for people who like that back button focus set up on the camera. There are multiple buttons on this camera that are meant to be adjusted as you would like. C1, C2, C3, C4 that you can adjust with 25 pages of options. So definitely a lot of customization on this camera. The mode dial is decent enough, it works well. On the side of it you have a adjustment dial, and also there is a dial on the back with the D-pad area, so you have two dials to adjust settings. I would have preferred to have a third one in a camera of this level, but you got two at least. So with ISO you have to press the D-pad area, basically a toggle switch, and then you can adjust it with the dial. I'm personally not a big fan of the back dials that rotate to adjust the setting. They work okay, but I prefer the front dial that this camera does not have. In this camera, right on the mode dial, you have two memory recall settings. That way you can push whatever you want into there. If you have a custom setup where it's for action or any other situation with photography or videography, you can push those settings into those custom save areas. Very nice feature. I'm always glad to see that on the camera. I did look at the Android version of the wireless control app for this camera. Similar setup to the A6100, I didn't notice any differences in function between those two cameras. With the A6600 and the app, basically you have it set up to connect and you get a little screen with a QR code. you can take a picture of that through the app that they provide, and it works almost instantly. It's very quick. I think this is the easiest setup for any type of app connection that I've ever used on a camera. It's quick, it works, very nice. For whatever mode you're in on the camera, you can basically control most settings through that app. So if you're in manual, you can adjust aperture, ISO, and all that. If you're in a different mode, change those settings. Same situation with the A6100. I didn't notice any way to change the focus point. Now, I probably needed to go into the camera itself and adjust things there, but I didn't try that out. You have to see for yourself, but in general, this app is okay. It is not the best out there in my opinion, but it has a decent amount of features to it. Let's go over some of the general features and functions of this camera that I noticed. It does have a lot of focus assist features. You can magnify, peaking, all the good stuff there. Autofocus wise, you've got AFS, AFA, which is automatic. Probably want to use that one most of the time. Also AFC, DMF, which is direct manual focus. That way, if you use autofocus, half press, and then you can use the manual focus ring if the lens supports it to adjust it from there. And also standard manual focus. For autofocus areas, you've got wide, zone, center, flexible spot, medium, flexible spot, large, and expanded flexible spot. So definitely quite a few options with autofocus areas on that camera. The A6600 of course has their most advanced autofocus features. So you've got the animal autofocus, you have the human autofocus with the eyes or the face. In the case of this camera, it's probably one of the most advanced at the moment for those features. You do have some of the standard photography features like bracketing, interval mode, silent shooting, which are all nice to have in a camera. The camera does have various creative styles you can apply to your JPEG photos if you're into that. I did quickly cycle through those. For more advanced photographers and videographers, you have the picture profiles in this camera. So various ones that give you flat profiles or custom ones, they are in this camera. Let's go over some of the video features of the camera. Definitely a lot here. Got zebras, which is very nice for adjusting exposure. Picture profiles, as I mentioned, you are able to see audio levels on the screen. It's very nice to have when you're recording. Of course, this camera does have the headphone jack and the mic jack. You do have 4K recording at 30 and 24 frames a second. With the 24, it's Super 35 crop, which is just a slight crop, I assume, on the APS-C format, and standard for 30 frames a second. At those two types of video files, you have 100 megabit and 60 megabit for the recordings. You also have 1080p video that goes up to 120 frames a second. With the 120 frames a second, I did test it out, and it does have audio recording with that mode, which is very interesting because a lot of cameras don't have that. I also think it has decent enough autofocus. I didn't test it too much, and the test that I did do with autofocus kind of didn't work amazingly well, but it appears to have that, and I was able to touch to focus at 120 frames a second. I did take a few sample clips, so let's check those out. The HDMI port seems very featured in this camera. It is a little tiny port, which is not great. It's the micro instead of the mini or the standard one. So you can do 4K output, 2160p, and also 1080p at 60 or 24 frames a second. You can control through the HDMI port, but I think that's just a TV only feature. Also, there is timecode output through the HDMI port, which is very nice. With this specific sensor, it's getting older. It's been used in their previous cameras. It's in their current ones besides this A6600. And it does have a very slow readout. So what that means is in 4K, if you shake the camera side to side, or there are situations where it's moving a lot, you will have some warpiness to your footage. Just something to keep in mind. Let's take a look at the sample photos that I took. I'm going to show you 100% crop and also a standard view of each photo. This camera does a lot of stuff, but in context, it can be a good or bad option for you. If you have the A6400, which is relatively new, you're getting some things like the in-body stabilization, but similar in a lot of features. So it'll be up to you if it is an option that you want to consider. Of course, I mentioned with the slow readout on the sensor, it's getting older and there are some negatives to that sensor in this camera. I think the standout feature of this camera is actually the battery. It's really great for people that are into the A7 series of cameras, so they can use this as a second body or a third body for backup purposes if they're doing professional work. It's a really great option because of that same battery. But it does have the shake reduction, so if you're going to get into vlogging or situations where you're hand-holding a lot of footage, it might help a little bit here and there, but Sony's stabilization isn't like Olympus and similar cameras. Of course, it's the most expensive camera in this lineup. It is my favorite camera at the moment for the Sony APS-C, nice large grip, that big battery, and a lot of features. However, at this price, especially with that new lens that's very expensive, you might want to consider full-frame cameras, getting into that side of it instead of the APS-C stuff, but if you want something as small and featured as possible, at the moment, the A6600 is a good option. Scott from Photography Banzai, again, thanks to Camera Craft in Rockford, Illinois for letting me try this out at their shop. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider subscribing. That helps me out a lot. Likes and shares help out a lot as well. Thanks again.